at our church, you are known as what you are, Pastor Cyon. So I haven't heard anything in your story yet, in your childhood, your upbringing, even college or anything that suggests you were on the path to who we know you now as Pastor Cyon. So where does that part of the story start?
Yeah. Looking back, and it's always one of those hindsight things, there are different mile markers and moments along the way where looking back, I can see, oh, this is what God was doing. This was the path that he was guiding me on. Definitely didn't expect it and wouldn't have written that in myself. So we were living in Southern California where Mike was stationed. We were there for a number of years, and I was doing what I had planned to do. I was teaching high school. So I used to be a public educator. So I taught high school for a number of years. And then Mike ended up, multiple things happened. Mike was medically retired from the military. And then there was massive budget cuts in our district, and I hadn't been there long enough to really have much seniority or tenure. And so I ended up getting pink slipped from my job. And we were both at this point where it was like, well, now what are we going to do? Basically, we're both unemployed. And I was pregnant with our first child at the time. And we're like, well, I kind of think we need to figure something out. And so we both started praying about it. And separately, both of us really felt like the Lord was telling us to relocate, to move to Virginia, that we just felt this invitation from God to go to Virginia. And so we actually ended up, and again, it was such a God thing the way that it happened, because anyone who's had any experience in the military, these things usually move pretty slowly. So we thought there's absolutely no way things are going to fall into place for us. And they did. So we ended up with just a couple months notice, really relocating from Southern California to Virginia. We had no plan at the time. We had no plan. We had no jobs. We had no house lined up. We literally just heard the call of God and packed up everything and went. We made it to Texas, basically halfway through. And I was like, where are we going to stay? Like, we literally are moving to Virginia right now, and we have no plan for when we arrive. So I called incredible woman, my nanny, who was someone that my mom had found when I was born, through an ad in the paper. And because my mom was, again, young, single, she had to drop out of college, worked a bunch of jobs to support us, and found this woman who was literally like my nanny. So I grew up with her, and she was like a grandma to me. And we had stayed in touch over the years. And I got in touch with her, and I was like, hey, so we're moving to Virginia, and we're in Texas right now, and we need a place to land when we arrive in like 2 days. Can we stay with you? And she said yes. And so we ended up in Virginia. And over the course of the next, I don't know, maybe 6 months, things just unfolded. We secured a place to live, which was actually the house right next door to my nanny. The people who owned that house, who we built relationship with, who rented us the house, are the ones who got us involved at the church that we ended up attending. Mike was in school at the time. He was going back to college. And I was actually offered a number of really fantastic teaching positions there, where we lived in Virginia, and felt like every single one, the Lord said no, just door after door slammed shut. And so we were kind of running on reserves at that time. And we were like, look, we've got to figure something out. So we landed this church. And it just so happened that one of the church members was the chief of police. Um, and Mike had always wanted to eventually transition into law enforcement. And so that connection is what took Mike into the next leg of his career. And then I was still trying to figure out what I was doing. And because I was pregnant, I was like, well, I want to get involved in the church. It's a good way to meet people. I might as well invest in the ministry that we're going to be using a lot, children's ministry, because I'm about to pop out a kid. So I got involved in children's ministry. And at the time, they didn't really have anyone running their children's ministry. And just with my leadership background and education experience, they said, hey, can we contract you? We would love to bring you in as our children's director and really just have you build this program. And I said no. I was like, no, I don't want to go into ministry. I don't want to work for a church. I'm a teacher. This is what I do. And Mike was like, I don't know, babe. I think you should pray about this. I was like, fine, I'll pray, but I already know what my answer is. So I prayed about it, and it was like almost audible. Felt like God was like, this is the open door. This is where I want you. And I was like, I don't want to do this though. It's like, all right, fine, I'll be obedient and I'll trust you. And so I stepped into this role, and I told them, I'm only here for 1 year. You have me for a year until you find the person who's actually supposed to be doing this job, but I will help you lay a foundation and build a program and train some volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. And so then after a year, they came to me and said, hey, we want to bring you on full time, like salaried staff children's director. And again, I was like, nope, I told you 1 year, this is not what I'm doing. And Mike said, I think you should pray about it. Like, fine. So I prayed about it and God said yes. And I was like, crap. So now I was their full-time, salaried children's director. And after about another year of that, the church was transitioning. We were planting other campuses, and they really needed the senior pastor to be free to kind of bounce around between all the campuses. And so they were developing the role of campus pastor, which was basically like the lead pastor for that one specific campus. And they said, hey, and they were calling it ministry coordinator because I wasn't a pastor at the time. And they said, hey, we want to transition you into this role. Basically, we want someone else to lead children's ministry, and we want you to actually be like the lead of this whole campus. And I said no. And Mike said, pray. So I prayed. And God said, do it. So again, I ended up, doing something because I felt like that's what God called me to. And then after another year of that, they said, hey, we would love to get you ordained. Have you ever considered going to Bible college and going through the ordination process? We just really feel like there's this pastoral call on your life. And I said, you want to guess?
No.
I said no, and Mike said pray, and I prayed, and God said yes, and so now I'm a pastor. That's kind of the long short of it. But I mean, yeah, so I went through the process. I ended up getting ordained through them. And I remember when I finally, finished everything, I was ordained as the pastor of that campus, which I continued to lead for a number of years. On the night of my ordination, we had a big celebration, a big ceremony, and the whole church came to it. And I remember driving to church that night, preparing for ordination and praying, God, I will never say no to you again. I have learned, it's obvious and evident what you've been doing. I will never say no to you again. And so then I pastored that campus for a number of years and really loved it, and got to be part of building some really incredible things there, and ended up over the course of that time also having 2 more kids. And it was after my third that God started talking to me about transitioning and moving into the next season. And despite what I had prayed on my ordination night, you know what I said? I said, no, I'm not leaving. I didn't want to do this in the first place. And I finally got to the point where I'm obedient and I'm loving this. And now you want me to go do something else? You're going to take this away from me? Are you kidding me? No. So it's a really, really interesting dynamic that the Lord and I have together. But yeah, that was a really tough year. It was a tough thing for me to have to transition and step out of that role into whatever God had next for me, because I had my own plans and my own desires. But again, it was really evident that God was in the midst of it. And so after many years leading there, we trained up my associate pastor. He took over leading the church, and I transitioned out, and it was a while of doing some kind of internal healing heart work. And then I got to move into working with some really fantastic leaders and doing a lot of consulting and teaching. So I've been, for the past few years, consulting and teaching and working with other church teams to do leadership development and build discipleship and things like that, which I actually ended up really loving. Mike made some transitions as well, which is what brought us out here to California. We moved out here in summer of 2019, and then of course COVID and everything. And yeah, loved what I was doing, loved getting to work with different leaders and church teams, loved consulting, loved getting to teach and raise up other leaders. And then after COVID, we kind of started, we had a really cool thing happening in our neighborhood. God really opened a lot of doors when we moved here. So we were doing home church for a while, had a really beautiful kind of missional community right in our neighborhood. But as things started opening up again after COVID, people kind of went back to their normal lives. And we felt like it's really time for us to actually be part of a bigger church community again. And so we started looking. We tried, I feel like, every possible church that is in the East Bay area. And we were really struggling to find a place where we felt like we were supposed to be. Until one day in April or May, whenever it was, we walked into Clayton Community Church, and Jamie was actually preaching. You were preaching, and we were, for a number of reasons, we left. Mike and I both looked at each other, and we were like, I feel like this is where we're supposed to be. Didn't really know why. just felt like God said, this is your new home for however long we happen to be here. And I was like, okay. And then, it wasn't long after that we started talking to Sean and just really found out, where the church was and what the church was going through. And I'm sure everyone can tell the story for me basically at this point, but there was conversations, there was an invitation from Sean, hey, I'd really love to talk to you about this role. And I said,